Hello? No. You don't want to know about these.
We'll just be a moment. Typical Iowa State efficiency.
It'll be a minute.
You gave me my check already. I can go home.
Well. We aren't always just so organized.
Sure you are. I'm not curious.
I don't know.
Well, Mike's plugged in.
No, he just went to check.
Hello? Hello? No. Hello?
Is it on now?
No. There we go.
Tonight, for our speaker, I'd like to introduce Donald Call, who's a writer for the Des Moines Register and Tribune, and afterward there'll be a question and answer session. So, here he is.
I think we're going to go through this again. Can everyone who wants to hear me? All right. I think a guy answered who didn't want to. Before we begin, I'd like to ask a question. Are there any highway commissioners here? I guess not. That's good. I won't have to speak slowly. I don't know. What is this? I could have stayed in Washington. I'm glad to be here, more or less. It would be more, I think, but the truth is, I'm very tired. As a colleague of mine put it recently, it's very hard work hounding a president out of office. I think we're all recovering from the ordeal in Washington. You can hardly believe how dull it is there now. I mean, we went through maybe 2 years where we'd wake up every morning and the headlines would say, "President defies Congress," "Attorney General indicted," "Expletives deleted." Now you turn on the news and the man says, "The president announced a new assistant, third deputy secretary of the press. Details later." Just enough to put you to sleep. I think it begins to look that Ford is going to be to the presidency what girls' basketball is to sport. Now, the main part of my speech is entitled, "When the Watergate Last and the Dooryard Bloomed," or "How I Hounded a President Out of Office and Found God." But before getting to it, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I note the absence of prolonged cheering. I realize I've been here before and I've always told you something about myself, but really I do it as a public service. If I can help just a few of you avoid the pitfalls that made me what I am today, it'll have been worth the effort. And besides, your college audience, Many of you are underclassmen, perhaps new on campus, and it might be inspirational to you to find out about my college career, which encompassed the entire decade of the 50s. That's right, I spent 10 years in college. Now, it was not my ambition to spend 10 years in college when I entered school. Like many of my generation, the thing I thought most in college was to stay out of the Army. It worked, too. By the time I graduated, I was too old for the draft. But I made some mistakes, chief among them being that I enrolled as a freshman in the School of Engineering at Wayne State University. Now, I don't know how many of you have any knowledge of my mechanical aptitude, but I am about as qualified by talent and temperament to be an engineer as Martha Mitchell is to be a Cistercian monk. But my father, who had always wanted to be an engineer, insisted, and I acquiesced. He was, after all, paying the bills. Yet there remained certain engineering concepts, no matter how hard I tried, that I simply couldn't master. For example, there was a question of why all the inches on the slide rule weren't the same length. I remember an early experience I had in shop. That's what they called it, shop, which was kind of like manual training that rusts. We had we were learning about lathes in one of the first episodes, and the first exercise I believe was to take a cylinder, put it on a lathe, hone it into a cone to fantastically small tolerances, something less than 1/4 of an inch. Well, the other fellows were doing that, and I kept trying to do that, and, I'd get both ends pointy, both ends fat. Honed it into a sphere once. Was really amazed my professor, but it didn't do much for me. Finally, about the 5th week, the other guys were on the lesson where they knit stoves out of steel wool, and I was still trying to hone my cylinder. The professor threw me out of the class because I was ruining too much stock, but I persevered. My father was still paying the bills, and things kept going slowly and slowly down. I went from bad to worse till one semester, I think it was my fifth freshman semester. Although I might have been the first of my 4 sophomore semesters by that time. I got mixed up. I was taking a course called Engineering English, which has got to tell you something right there. Bonehead English, actually, is what a lot of people called it. And I was taking my final exam. And it so happened that for that semester in the College of Engineering, I did all my studying for all my courses consisted of reading a series of short comic novels by Max Schulman, which didn't help me out a lot in Engineering Drawing 101, but it inspired me to write my Engineering English final in the form of a series of short comic stories by Max Schulman. Well, my professor flipped out over it. It's the first time anyone had ever written a funny exam for him on purpose. He gave me an A. It was the first A I'd ever gotten in engineering. And it occurred to me that perhaps I was in the wrong racket, that I could transfer to lit school, become an English major, write all my finals like Max Schulman, graduate magna cum laude. I attempted to do that. However, my grades were so low in the School of Engineering that Lit School wouldn't accept me. So they put me on what they called a conditional transitional program. This will make perfect sense to those of you familiar with university administration. It'll be insane to the rest of you. I was allowed to take all my courses in Lit School, but all my records were kept in the School of Engineering. This was supposed to be a matter of 2 or 3 semesters while you raised up your grade point, and then they transfer you out officially. Well, I found out that even in Lit School, it takes more than being able to write final exams like Max Schulman to get by. And while I did a little better, it was yet not good. And I didn't get my average above a 2 point. And I set an intercollegiate record for semesters on the conditional transitional program. I think I was there 6. Finally, someone stepped on my IBM card with a golf shoe or something, and it flipped out, and they found out it was this guy spending his life on the conditional transitional program, and they kicked me out of school. They flunked me out of school. Well, I had to get a job, which was a new experience for me. So I got a job as a chip man in a ball bearing factory, the only thing which my education had thus suited me for. Now, many of you probably don't know what a chip man in a ball bearing factory does, or even what a ball bearing factory does. Ball bearing factory makes balls and bearings. Does it with a lathe, which they call a screw machine, which seemed a good enough name for me. Put these pieces of metal on, and this lathe goes around and makes them into balls and bearings, and the shavings drop down into an oil bath below. Chip man's job is to drag around a huge iron bucket on wheels, scrape the shavings out of this oil bath, then drag it over to a centrifuge, dump it in, whirl the shavings around until you make them into a giant Brillo pad, recovering the oil. Then you put the oil back in the machines and you toss the Brillo pad away. Well, I did that for 6 months, from 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. And I found it a profound educational experience. It taught me I didn't want to be a chip man the rest of my life, which is more than 6 semesters on the conditional transitional program had managed to do. So I talked my way back into school. How, I don't know to this day. Finally did better, got into Lit School, and graduated with a degree in English and a 2.00003 grade point. Well, I didn't want to go to work, so I thought perhaps I might go to grad school. So I searched around and decided on journalism grad school, largely for 2 reasons. One, I was inspired by the idealism and the dedication and the chance for service in the profession. And second, with my grade point average, it was the only grad school that would take me. Now, I did better in grad school. I sort of got enthused about the whole thing. And I got my master's. As a matter of fact, I was named the most outstanding graduate student of my graduating class. There were 2 of us in the class. The other guy was German. English was his second language. But with the school record I had, I wasn't proud. I took the award, and I'm glad I did, because I haven't won one since. I came to Des Moines in 1960. I'd hardly ever heard of the place. It was just another exotic name to me, like Boise or Des Plaines or something like that. Oh, the way I figured it, the outstanding journalism graduate student, I'd come here, spend a couple years in the sticks, give them a break, and then I'd make my reputation and go to the New York Times, which would send me to their London bureau if nothing was open in Paris. I spent the next 12 years in Des Moines, and the New York Times never called once. In fact, I'd be in Des Moines yet if it were not for the News and Hate Spreaders Union. Now, many of you probably don't know about the News and Hate Spreaders Union. It's a clandestine anti-counterinsurgency journalistic society that seeks to overturn the results of national elections, just for the hell of it. People there read some of my columns during the Johnson administration, and they recruited me as an agent. My first assignment was to drive The Sound of Music out of Des Moines. Now, the quick among you will recognize that The Sound of Music isn't an election. It's a movie, but it was a popular movie, and this was kind of a dry run for me. They figured if I could kill off something like Sound of Music, I could kill off a national election in the Midwest. So I set out to do the job, and I did it. I drove, using the power of the press and my own polemic skills, I drove The Sound of Music out of Des Moines. Took 2.5 years. I kept getting increasing responsibility with the organization, became their top Midwestern agent, until January of 1972, I got word that the News and Hate Spreaders Union had arranged a transfer for me to Washington, D.C. My assignment was to hound Richard Nixon out of office. I was naturally flattered. I set out to do the job, and I did it. I hounded Richard Nixon out of office. Took 2.5 years. Let me tell you how I did it. Nixon, you'll remember, was doing pretty well at the time. My job was to turn things around. I arrived in Washington. Shortly thereafter, the Plumbers Union was formed at the White House. I think it's a tribute to my skill that many people still think those two things are a coincidence. 3 months later, the plumbers broke into Dr. Fielding's office. Dr. Fielding, of course, being Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist. The following week, I got a raise. At the time of the Watergate burglary itself, I was able to hire a couple of young assistants named Woodward and Bernstein. And giving credit where credit is due, this pair, although inexperienced, was of invaluable aid to me in my hounding efforts. They were willing lads, both of them. Eventually, of course, I was given a much larger budget and hired most of the Washington Press Corps, including Clark Mullenhoff, whom I put in charge of making Ron Ziegler cry. It was an enormous operation toward the end. There's a body of economic thought that holds it all that kept us out of an economic depression during the last year was the Watergate industry. Now, the bumper stickers alone were worth millions to the gross national product, and they weren't a patch on the legal costs. And if you'll notice what's happened to the stock market since Mr. Nixon packed it in a few weeks ago. It's as though GM stopped making cars. Now, many people think I hounded Mr. Nixon out of office for personal reasons. Others think it was a religious thing, and that I have an unreasonable bias against devout hypocrites. None of that is true, although I disliked Mr. Nixon, without regard to his race, color, creed, or national origin, if any. The reason I hounded him out of office was because, for me, it was a living. There was a secondary reason that the News and Hate Spreaders Union wanted to reverse the results of the 72 election, of course. We believe that those results, if allowed to stand, would have meant the end of our union as we knew it, and perhaps of the entire journalistic profession. Mr. Nixon, we recognize, had a great reverence for the Constitution, and he wouldn't put up with just anyone using it. Might get dirty. So we had to move and move quickly, and I'm just proud that in my small way, I was able to topple him from power. Now, of course, now that we've got rid of him, we keep wondering what to do with him. Some say he should be treated just like everybody else. Others say that's too harsh a punishment. And I must admit, when he first left office in that first flush of victory, I was struck with an generous impulse. Let the fellow alone, I said. Why prosecute the poor chap? He suffered enough. Although admittedly I was not ready, with Leonard Garment, to say, stonewalling doth not misprison make. And I'm glad I wasn't ready to say that. But when President Jerry said he hoped President Emeritus Nixon would find the peace in disgrace that eluded him in glory, I couldn't even speak. I was that choked up. I merely nodded at the television set. Then word arrived that Mr. Nixon was asking something in the neighborhood of $850,000 for office expenses to wind down his presidency, although it did not seem to be ticking when he took it away from him. I was understanding. Well, I said, you can take a boy out of the neighborhood, but you can't take the neighborhood out of the boy. He's used to working with figures like that. They come naturally to him. We'll have to give him time to adjust. He suffered a lot. That's what I told myself. Then I found out that Mr. Nixon's literary agent, who happens to be Mr. Agnew's agent too, by the way, I guess they're still reluctant to break up a winning team. I found out that Mr. Nixon's literary agent was out shopping for a publisher for Mr. Nixon's memoirs, which I assume will be called something like Watch Out for That Seventh Crisis, It's a Beaut. And the agent was asking for these memoirs $2 million out front. It suddenly occurred to me that maybe Mr. Nixon hasn't suffered enough. I mean, he suffered, but not $2.8 million worth. And another thing occurred to me. When he quit, he said it was because he'd lost his political support. That was the reason he gave. I've lost my political base, so I'm going to step aside for the good of all of you. 30 guys. Let's take the man at his word, I say. Why should a president who quits because of the loss of political support be offered immunity, amnesty, clemency, and pardon? It's insulting. Herbert Hoover left office after losing his political support. Nobody offered him anything. Harry Truman was lower in the polls than Nixon ever was, but when he left for home, he didn't have so much as a fixed parking ticket on him. I think we should do Mr. Nixon the same favor. Show some respect for the office. Just treat him like anyone else. Assume he's innocent. Give him a fair trial. put him in jail. Oh, I know. A lot of people will object to having a former president eating out of a tin dish. But if New Jersey can get used to it with its mayors, we can get used to it with our presidents. The point is, if we fail to follow this thing out to the bitter end, we're going to wind up with another Agnew on our hands. Remember Spiro Agnew? The first vice president to walk around with a for rent sign on his back? When he traded away his job for a get-out-of-jail-free card, everybody said, wasn't it terrible what happened to him? A disgraced man. You don't have to send him to jail, they said. He's broken and ruined anyway. Could hardly eat my Fruit Loops that morning. The next thing he knew, he was negotiating an enormous advance on a yet-to-be-written novel. Then last week, it was reported that he is now earning more than $100,000 a year selling Kentucky to the Arabs. That's right. Got this deal with a development firm where he makes $100,000 plus a percentage of the profits, hustling a potential resort in Kentucky to Arabs looking for a place to rest their oil dollars. In addition, last week he attended a Bob Hope concert in the Washington area. Hope, champion of the overdog, introduced him to the crowd, who then gave him a standing ovation. Spiro Agnew, a standing ovation. After the concert, he stood around signing autographs using his own name. Now, you've got to agree that he's certainly doing a whole lot better than a lot of us who aren't ruined and broken. I don't need that with Richard Nixon. If he would promise to stay out of sight, keep his mouth shut, I wouldn't object to calling off the dogs. But he won't. If we let him go, he'll probably turn up selling Massachusetts to the Turks. He was never his favorite state. What I say is, when it comes to suffering, better him than us. Now, I've often been accused of being a Nixon hater. I've never denied it. It seems I've spent all of my life disliking that man. It's not true, of course. It's merely all of my adult life. First became aware of him when I was in college. Early on, when he was running for the vice presidency for the first time. And I'm proud to say I cast the first vote I ever cast against Richard Nixon for vice president. I ignored the other three candidates involved, Stevenson, Eisenhower, and wasn't Kefauver that time, it was someone else. I voted against Nixon. But the Chequers speech is what really turned me off. If you have never seen that, you should really try and get it on campus, because it is a laugh riot. Just disgusting. And it became apparent to me watching him what an awful, terrible phony he was. I didn't know at the time, though, that I was going to have to deal with him for the next 22 years of my life. I mean, you get a shorter sentence than that for premeditated murder these days. I wondered, from time to time, all these years, what we've done to deserve him. I think it must be something. You know, they say that Watergate, the whole Watergate thing, viewed in its largest sense, has proved that our system works. Well, I view that as an overstatement. No system that produces the tandem of Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew as its unchallenged political leaders can be said to be working. What would it do if it was broken, for Christ's sake? Right. What will we get if it were broken? Juan Perón and Attila the Hun, perhaps. What happened is that we had a couple of backup systems that worked. They clicked in after our major system failed. I mean, do you realize how close we were to having Spiro Agnew accede to the presidency? Or even worse than that, what if the Watergate burglars had not been caught? What if Frank Wills had never wondered when he saw those tapes on the door again that he just taken off? What if he'd been doping off? Is it improbable that G. Gordon Liddy would be the head of the FBI now? Not terribly. And when you look at the choices we've been faced with in our last national elections, you know, McGovern and Nixon, Nixon and Humphrey, Johnson and Goldwater, it makes you want to weep. I mean, this is a nation of over 200 million people. Many of them are honest, some are good looking. Another forced to step aside after he lost popular support, and the third forced to resign to avoid impeachment. Now, those are hardly the marks of a healthy system. I think there's more wrong with this than just Richard Nixon, and that outlives him in government. He's as much a creation of the system as its perverter. Our system that we say is working in a way. But it demands that men spend literally millions of dollars in pursuit of jobs that pay $42,500 a year. Now right there you've got trouble. There are very few honest men who know where to get their hands on that kind of money. But for corrupt men, to quote our beloved leader, it would be no problem. I think we really must stop patting ourselves on the back in the wake of Watergate. The best thing you can say for it, the very best, is that it was a narrow escape. Damn narrow. Next time, I fear we shall not be so lucky. Thank you very much. I am willing to entertain comments, criticisms, and questions from the audience. Or audience. Yes? dirty question. The man says, if you're so smart, what's the solution? I oversimplified perhaps the question, but that was the thrust of it. Well, I really think one of the things you have to do is work on some sort of campaign reform that cuts down the effect of money in political campaigns without making it an incumbents law. I fear kind of that's what the present law that they're working on is beginning to shape up as. In addition to that, really people have to become involved in their political parties, because a political party is an odd institution in our system, and it's not really conceived of in the Constitution. I mean, they just really do what they want, basically. And the only way you can get them to do something good is to have involvement. I have a theory, it's perhaps romantic, that if we had good local government, we could not fail to have good national government. That if people got really involved in their local government, the spill-off would be automatic, rather than everybody picking a presidential candidate and working like hell for him every 4 years and then forgetting about it. If you really got involved in your community where you can have some influence, it would be have a remarkable effect. Do I belong to a party? No, but I really can't. I don't feel. Yeah, because of the journalism. My wife does, and I really strongly feel that journalists should not be active in things they're covering. Yeah.
Now that we've noticed a little bit of the problems that our elders have faced in politics, are trying to ecology and people to carry it forward. Would you care to comment on what the Young Republicans did at the National Convention in Lake Tahoe about a month ago, and recommending Barry Goldwater to be vice president?
Man asked me to comment on the fact that the Young Republicans at their convention recommended that Barry Goldwater be vice president. Excuse me, I hadn't known that actually. I try and avert my eyes whenever I come across Young Republicans. And I'm not much more enthusiastic about Young Democrats, to tell you the truth. Just binding together in an organization, a political organization where they can kind of shove you aside and discount everything you say, seems to me inviting disaster. And it's proved out, I think, by that suicidal psychology in having an organization like the Young Republicans. Then manifests itself in a recommendation for Barry Goldwater to be vice president. That blows my mind, frankly, Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater, he's kind of been, his reputation's been resurrected. But basically, I think, and although a nice man and one of the more jollier fellows to run for the presidency in recent years, I think he's a dunce. I really just don't think he's a very smart man, period, and not a very serious man. I think people who would put him up for that are not very serious people.
What about the Nixon support in Congress when it suggested that Nixon resigned and then Ford take the presidency and named Nixon vice president and then resign?
I know. Are you all aware of that proposal? Was it Sonny Montgomery or one of those guys down south in where the sun never shines? And he suggested that Ford take the presidency, and this was right during that week of resignation. Name Nixon as vice president, and then Ford resigns, so Nixon becomes president again. I think a body 435 strong should have one insane person in it, just to represent, that segment of the population. like Roman Ruska when he wanted mediocrity represented on the Supreme Court. Although really, mediocrity is so overrepresented in Congress that you don't need it represented on the Supreme Court.
So what about the charges that the great humanitarian Richard Nixon got our boys home, ended the war, got the kids off the streets, et cetera. How do you react to these kind of statements?
Well, he asked me to respond to the kind of defense that Richard Nixon receives when he receives one. But that will come back again. That feeling that he did get us out of the war, brought our boys home on their feet rather than on their knees. Never forget that. And had the détente with Russia and China. And my own gut reaction to that is, given the circumstances, I don't find his accomplishments remarkable. This might be a function of my prejudice against the man, and I realize that. So I don't weigh that very heavily in trying to arrive at a position. Beyond that, however, I do not think that you can mitigate bad works with good in that manner. I mean, you break the law, you break the law. It doesn't matter you're a Nobel Prize winner. If you kill 3 people, to use perhaps the most extreme example imaginable, you're liable for those murders. There's no way around it. Now, it seems to me that, given a hard look at what Nixon's done, what he did, you have to think the guy was dishonest off the bat. He became president, and while he had a lot of money, he was not a rich man in the sense of, rich. He was probably not a millionaire at the time. He just had, kind of a high, upper middle class, wealthy guy who'd been a New York lawyer for a while. Within 6 months of taking office, and his salary at this point is $200,000 a year the president makes, he bought a $1.5 million home in California and an $800,000 home in Florida. Well, how are you gonna pay for that? Unless you don't pay taxes. So all that nonsense about somebody handing a sheet to him and him signing it, come on, who's he trying to kid? He knew what he was doing all along. He was going to make a lot of money while he was president. I don't understand. That's a neurosis on his part, I think. I think it's more than just, dishonesty or something. I think he had almost a sick need to have as much money as the people who owned him. And I don't think truly he understands what hit him yet. That's the tragic part, he just doesn't understand. It doesn't make any sense to him. He thinks that we really did hound him out of office because we wanted to overthrow the results of the '72 election. And if you're looking for not a tragedy, but it's certainly a poignant aspect to this, that seems to me the poignant aspect. That he's been told for 2 years what the score is, and he doesn't believe it even now. That's wild. Yes? Oh, the Washington press feels something different every day. When this whole Watergate thing started, they say the odds are such and such on 6-4 on Nixon resigning. And then the next week, the odds have gone way down because this thing happened. Oh, the odds have gone up again. They did this for 2 years, just weekly. The odds would be going up, back and forth. Clark Mullenhoff, a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago. This was during the period that's dealt with in the early part of the tapes, as a matter of fact, when they're talking about the hangout road and the partial limited hangout road and you know, how we're going to cover this up, and John Dean is saying there's a cancer on the presidency. At that point, when the White House still has total hope of covering the whole thing up, Mollenhoff says he'll either be impeached or resign. I said, Clark, how can you say that? That's ridiculous. They'll never impeach him. You mean that Congress is going to have guts enough to impeach him? He says, when they get a look at the evidence, they won't have guts enough not to impeach him. When the odds were up, he said that. When the odds were down, he said that. So, I tell you that, you know, what I'm trying to describe is what the Washington Press Corps feels is not nearly so valuable as knowing what a knowledgeable fellow really knows. Now on Kennedy, I don't know. I don't think he probably knows at this point. You know, he's got all kinds of, you know, family problems besides, you know, his rather checkered past, shall we say. His wife has emotional problems, and certainly his son is dealing with the tragedy. There's the always grim specter of an assassination attempt whenever a Kennedy runs for that office. Seems almost there's an inevitability about it. So I don't know what he'll decide. He'll certainly be the choice of the party pros. I think the old line, you know, AFL-CIO types. But my guess would be that he wouldn't. But it's just no better than anyone else's guess. Yeah. What an intelligent question. Yeah, I'm trying to put together another book, and I might try and call it something like When the Watergate Laughed and the Dooryard Bloomed, and Other Tales of the Supernatural, something like that. I hope to, at least. I'm asking $400,000 out front. They've countered with $1.37 in back. Clarence Pickard, he's 84 now, year-old bike rider. A year ago in the bike ride, is campaigning for David Stanley. I think it's great. I think people should campaign for whomever they wish to campaign for. He's known Stanley for a long time. They were active in the League of Nations organization together, and he thinks highly of him. I think it's when a guy like Clarence, it's almost impossible. He's so real, you know. He's been there so long that it's impossible for him to do anything really wrong. It really is. I mean, that's because it's real. It's him. Whatever he does, it's Clarence Pickard. And the only time you really get in trouble, I think, is when you do things that don't speak to your best instincts. And I can't imagine him not doing anything that wouldn't. And, you know, my feelings of him campaigning for David Stanley have nothing at all to do with how I feel about David Stanley or anyone else he might campaign for. I just think he's a hell of a guy. Yes.
Do you think that the guys that went to Canada rather than Vietnam and now are faced with the prospect of either working their way back into the country or going to jail, should have to do that? Nixon can go free?
Ask me about amnesty for the particularly the people in Canada in the face of Nixon going free. Well, obviously not, because I don't think that, you know, Nixon should go free. I don't think Agnew should have gone free. They used the excuse that, well, they had to get him out of there because of the extraordinary circumstances, you know, that he might become president. But he hasn't got enough backbone to stand up. They could have forced him out of office. They didn't have to give in to him. He just ran a bluff on him. If they wanted to get him out of office, they could have gotten him out of office. They could have run a double impeachment. It's like a double wedding. The whole question of the amnesty for the people in Canada is one I'm not entirely comfortable with. I naturally sympathize with their view of the war. On the other hand, I wonder if their coming back wouldn't be a divisive thing at a time we don't need more divisive things. There's really no free lunch. Just because you do the right thing doesn't mean that you're rewarded for that. You do the right thing to do the right thing. But I must say, it's pretty easy for me to stand up here and make any statement on that position, because one, I have no rancor toward them for not serving in the war, and the other, I have nobody who in my family who's undergone a similar experience. So I really kind of feel almost unqualified to. It's such an emotional issue that people who sort of stand on the sidelines are, like me, are reluctant to enter into it, because the people who know something about it, they know it in their guts. They don't think about amnesty; they just boil up with passion about the issue. I'm always loath to give my little opinions when someone feels that strongly and has so much reason to about a given issue. Yes.
In light of the recent political situation, how do you view lawyers who look upon as political candidates in your trial?
How do you think lawyers will be looked upon as political candidates? The same. Lawyers have never had a high reputation. If you look back through the centuries, you look at Daumier's marvelous drawings as cartoons of lawyers as these vicious, venal men. In fact, their reputation recently was lawyers was higher than it has been. They have the skills. They have the skills to get elected. They have the skills for legislature. I think it's unfortunate that we have such a preponderance of lawyers, because they what they've done, they've made laws so that we're so tied up in laws in our society that you always have to hire 4 lawyers to untangle it, and the profession seems burgeoning. I think the interesting sort of parallel set of stories. Lawyers are asking that they be allowed to advertise. And the massage parlors in Des Moines have been denied the right to make house calls, which means that the lawyers are advertising like massage parlors. The massage girls are not making house calls like doctors, which is nice because it's bringing all the professions together. Yeah. Have our relations with foreign countries improved, like Nixon says? Yeah, I think, to a degree, but that doesn't depend. I mean, I thought it was shocking when he said that our relationship with Russia depends on his personal relationship with Brezhnev. It's, these guys play for big stakes. They don't worry about personal relationships. Most of the people who led the countries who fought in World War I were cousins, for crying out loud. And it didn't stop the most hideous war perhaps in all time from taking place. The time was right. Nixon was one of the guys that When I was saying, let's make friends with Red China, he was saying, that guy's a communist because he's saying, let's make friends with Red China. Then when he makes friends with Red China, he says, boy, wasn't that a good thing I thought of, making friends with Red China? There is another possibility, though, which I entertain, and I hate to because I don't like the idea. It's that we really do need Richard Nixon to have good foreign relations with Russia and China, the other countries of the world. Because they're all run by thugs, and they recognize him as one of their own. I'm serious. Could be that in a modern society, the kind of man you can look up to, who can inspire the spirit of the American people, who can be a decent Democrat, an idealistic man, would make a lousy president because they try and chew him up. I don't know. But it's something that scares me occasionally. Yes. Do I think Ford is a good president? He's barely a president. How do you know he's going to be a good president? He certainly, it's like a breath, like someone opened a window when he walked in. He's got a nice manner about him. I think he's a decent man. But the problems he faces as president, particularly economic, are enormous. And he has not given any indication yet that he's willing to deal with them. For one thing, you just never hear when you talk about the Project Independence for our oil use, never hear anyone say a word about what you have to do. And that's decrease consumption. You have to decrease consumption. And they all talk about it improving supply. And he backs away from even so meaningless a gesture as a 10-cent tax on gasoline. You really, it's going to come down to it. There's no way to get that much oil without ruining your economy, without ruining your ocean, and there's no way to use it without ruining your air. And that's like an iceberg out there. We keep going right toward it, and no one blinks. They just keep, the band just keeps on playing. Well, sooner or later, the band's going to change to Nearer My God to Thee. I mean, it's going to be and then it's going to be a crisis. Like, oh my God, why didn't someone tell us about this? And Ford just doesn't seem to have any concept of that, and I worry about that. Yeah. Who impresses me politically? Oh, I'm afraid I still like Gene McCarthy. I don't know, a six-time loser, but it seems to me that one of the things wrong with our system is that a man like Gene McCarthy cannot be elected president. And the reason he can't be elected president is he doesn't lust after the job. Presidential candidates, they get this gleam in their eye. And after a while, they would sell their mothers into slavery if they could only become president. And the reason is because, well, mom's had a useful life, and I would help all of mankind if I became president. All of mankind is certainly more important than old mom. See ya, kid. They really psych themselves up that what's good for them is necessary for the world. That's basically what the whole Watergate thing was. And that's a universal in politics. So I'm really not impressed with a great many politics. It's almost a catch-22 situation. If you're qualified to be president of the United States, what are you doing running for president of the United States? Do I think Kissinger's threat to quit was justified? Oh, not really. I mean, not justified in a mature sense, but it was. He had all the cards. He knew they weren't going to call his bluff. He's convinced the Senate that they need him more than he needs them, and he may be right for all I know. So I think he was in the wrong, but there was no way of calling him out on it. There's just not that much guts in the whole Congress. Yes.
Yeah, do you think that Nixon's resignation speech was good?
Did I think Nixon's resignation speech was good? It was better than I had feared it was going to be. I had this terrible feeling that he was going to say, all right, now you've got it, you hounded me from office. I'm going to hold my breath and turn blue. I think it was deficient in that it gave no sense that he had any inkling at all why he was resigning the presidency of the United States. He was resigning the presidency of the United States in lieu of impeachment. He was hurrying things on about 4 weeks to make the transition easier, and it was a nice thing for him to do. Why he went through this charade about, lost my political base and reached for higher things and failed. What is he reaching for when Segretti and those people are saying terrible things about other candidates? Or what's he reaching for when he's taking $10,000 contributions in clandestine ways? What's he reaching for when he commits he knowingly accepts the fact that his people commit perjury? I mean, what reaching for a higher goal is that? I still think that the remarkable thing is that he does not seem to have a clue, just not a clue. No, Washington, D.C. has the Department of Transportation, which is kind of the granddaddy highway commission of us all, but it's so big no one can ever find anybody else there. Washington, D.C. is an oddly run town because it's a federal city, and we're going through having home rule for the first time, electing public officials like mayors for the first time ever in Washington, D.C. But generally it's run by a couple of committees which are in turn owned by a couple of redneck southern congressmen who run the city for the benefit of the suburbanites generally, and for the tourists. So the people of Washington get rather short shrift. It's really kind of too bad, yeah. Yeah.
With the Pentagon paper showing all the illegal and secret methods that government used to get its involved in Vietnam, the corrupt government we have in Vietnam right now, don't you think it would be only fair and unanimous gesture on the part of the United States government to admit that it was wrong?
Yes, in view of what we now know about the conduct of the war and the way we were lied to again and again by two administrations, time after time, whether it would not be a just and magnanimous gesture for the United States government to admit it was wrong. Yes, it certainly would. It would be that. But the thing I would worry you, if you ask me to vote on the question, I say hell yes, amnesty by all means. But when I'm asked a question about it, I just assume that people would say, well, if you were in charge, if you were president, what would you do? And that's where I begin to have reservations, simply because there'd be a lot of people driven half insane by that. I think basically it would be a just thing. Maybe, you just do what's just and then let the chips fall where they may.